Please. Oh, there he is. There's my guy. Good job. How's your new show going? Good?
Very well, thank you.
I heard good.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. Thank you. Yes, indeed, Mr. President. We are back. This is America First on the Salem Radio Network with me, your host, Sebastian Gorka. Impeachment, impeachment, impeachment. The 25th Amendment insurrection. The hyperbole doesn't stop. Somebody who can help us translate it and get to the truth is, of course, the founder of JustTheNews.com, our good friend John Solomon. Check out his podcast, the John Solomon Podcast. Follow him on Twitter at JSolomonReports. And also, his fabulous team members can be found regularly at Real America's Voice. John, Happy New Year and welcome to America First.
Thank you, Seb. Good to be with you, and Happy New Year to you.
All right, so we have to discuss the latest breaking. You've been talking to Matt Gaetz just a few moments ago. We'll talk about that. But first, as a media professional of, will not be specific, just a few years, who has worked in all the biggest organizations and now runs his own media empire, your response to the legacy media's coverage of the events of just the last few days?
Well, I think only one word comes to mind, and it's a capital H, hypocrisy. If you go back and take a look at CNN, we'll just take CNN, and when liberal rioters were tossing Molotov cocktail into loaded police cars, where police officials were in the car while the Molotov cocktail was being shot in, you and I would call that an assault, a deadly assault, but they were calling it social justice protesting. Then, when the Capitol stormed by people in MAGA outfits, they have now turned around and it's an insurrection. The incongruity is not lost on the American people. Most people remember the media making excuses for violence for 6 or 7 months, and then to see it flip around. Now, the consistency has been Republicans have been consistent from the beginning. They decried the violence when it happened all throughout the summer, and they immediately decried the violence as it was ongoing still in the Capitol. So there's an inconsistency in the way that Democrats and their friends in the news media have covered these events the last 6 months, and there's been a consistency among the Republican Party. And I think that won't be lost. And we're in the fog of war. Everybody's in an emotional moment, but 3, 4, 5 weeks from now, this is going to become a very powerful contrast that Democrats only see violence when it's in their advantage.
I don't want to get wonkish and technical, but I've been on a tear since the violence broke out in Congress on one specific issue, and it has to do with the coverage. So I spent many years teaching what is technically called irregular warfare and counterterrorism for the Defense Department for various agencies across the nation. And I taught insurgency and counterinsurgency and what insurrection means. And I've made one point for the last few days. Never in the history of humankind, for the last 6,000 years, has an insurrection ever occurred where unarmed civilians were the perpetrators of that insurrection. It's not to say, what happened in Congress wasn't illegal. It was. You're not allowed to do what they did. But it wasn't an insurrection. And I just have to ask you, how is it that not just the politicians like Nancy Pelosi, but it is almost, it is. It is the universal term being used by the mainstream media is insurrection. As a person who's seen the sausage factory from the inside, how does this happen? Is some edict given down, or is there just such a level of groupthink that propagandistic terms become the lexicon, John?
It is remarkable. I don't know the answer yet. I mean, we're still digging into how the lexicon for this event where it was chosen, but it is uniform, and it was the same thing we saw all throughout Russia, right? Yes. It was Russia collusion, even though there was no collusion. It was a complete delusion. What the last 4 years have shown is that the Democratic establishment and the national news media establishment are aligned, and in many cases also aligned with the intelligence and law enforcement establishment at the federal level. And that allows them to very quickly together, either because of ideology, communication, whatever, to create a singular narrative, even when it's not true. And you just think about how many reporters reported on the 25th Amendment without telling people it's not for people who are healthy and sane. You can't do it because you want to get someone you don't like out. It's not for that reason. But, the news media didn't give that information for so long, and I think that's where why the Gallup poll just last week, just before this event, showed that American confidence in media was at an all-time low, and 30% of Americans say they don't trust the media at all, not 1 inch, not 1 iota. I think the media has earned that, and this latest performance is just another example of it.
Yeah, this is such a fabulously important and disturbing point that it's not just the media and the left, it's also the intelligence services that seem to be using the same talking points, and that is very, very disturbing. We're talking to the founder of justthenews.com. You've got to follow it. Check it out every day. Follow him on Twitter, J. Solomon Reports. We'll be back with John. We are back with the founder, the editor-in-chief, the president of justthenews.com. Bookmark it. Check it every single day regularly. Follow him on Twitter at J. Solomon Reports. John, you have spoken to a member of the House just before you came on air with us. What is the latest news that you can share with our millions of listeners on Nancy's threat to impeach the incumbent president just days before the inauguration?
Well, it's remarkable. I was Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida, who just a couple nights ago got a standing ovation on the floor when he pointed out that hypocrisy you and I were just talking about for the commercial break. But to my surprise, Republicans are bracing and really preparing as though there may be an impeachment next week. It's not on the calendar yet, but they're taking Nancy Pelosi at her word. And Matt Gaetz said that there was an emergency meeting today and that he and Jim Jordan and others who played a key role in the last impeachment trial are preparing as though Nancy Pelosi is going to go through with this. And what Matt Gaetz said is, this is interesting as well, he thinks the reason Pelosi would do it, even though from a common sense standpoint it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, the president's leaving, he's indicated he's leaving, is that the Democrats are becoming increasingly worried that their left wing is restless, that Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, and Joe Biden, because there's such a narrow margin in both of the chambers of Congress, aren't going to be able to deliver much on the liberal agenda, and so this becomes a substitute sugar pill for them, trying to impeach the president on his way out the door so that they don't have to think about the fact they may not get those other things that they've wanted for so long.
Now, this is fascinating, John, because, I'm a conservative. We cater here to conservatives, the patriots, with our millions of listeners and viewers on YouTube as well. And there is this, I'm not saying it's the majority, but there is this definite, the apocalypse is upon us. The president has conceded and the crazies are coming in, and there's going to be 3 new states. There's going to be mass amnesty. So is your analysis that despite the events of the last few days, that really a Biden administration will potentially be hamstrung, and with the few seats that she has in her majority, that Nancy will not be as bold as some of the doomsayers are saying?
Well, it may not even be a question of boldness. It may just be a question of simple math. Just think about this. Nancy Pelosi barely got reelected as Speaker. She had to wheel in COVID patients in order to get the votes that she needed to get through. And that's not as controversial as something like stacking the court or bringing in new states or creating a real extreme leftist agenda. And she has 20, 30 members in her caucus that still come from those swing states and swing districts where Trump is big. In the Senate, you have an even tougher problem, right? A John Tester in Montana, a Joe Manchin in West Virginia, where there are just massive amounts of Trump supporters and Republican bases there. They're not going to walk off the ledge and take some of these votes. And so I think Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi already know their hands are tied. And so if Matt Gaetz is right, impeachment becomes the sugar pill for them. The gift they can give the left, it's a meaningless gift, right? The president's leaving in 11 days.
Yeah.
And so I think what's going on right now is political posturing, but it is a sign of what I think is going to be a dynamic. Joe Biden most likely will be wearing his breastplate backwards more than we ever know. I think incoming fire is coming from behind him, not in front of him.
That's interesting. So the bad news is the Republicans are taking the impeachment scenario seriously, according to John and to Congressman Gaetz, who reported to him. But the good news is that the radicalism may be kept in check by the razor-thin margins. We talked to John Solomon. Follow him right now, J. Solomon Reports, and the incredible justthenews.com team that appears regularly every single day at Real America's Voice. John, last question I have for you today is, you have been truly a champion for the truth, especially in the last few years, especially when it comes to Russia collusion, lies, and Hunter Biden and everything else. Are you worried about the next 2 years? Are you worried about what we've seen in the last 48 hours when it comes to suppression of the truth, especially on social media? How does a man running a media entity look to the next 2 years?
Well, I just wrote a whole column on this. I am. I mean, this last election was won before Labor Day 2020 by two things. Controlling the narrative through censorship so that Republican and conservative voices couldn't break through like liberals, and changing the rules of the election so that anything went when it came to November 3rd. And Republicans have to take a look at this dynamic and say, we have to take it back. How do you do that? Well, you got the legislatures. You'll take that. You can set the rules for the election, impose your will there. But in the other places, they have to begin. Republicans and conservatives have to begin to create an alternative communications infrastructure that's just as good, just as widespread, just as popular as Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, because those platforms, which you all fell in love with, they're fun, right? They're great to be on. Well, they're now beginning to impose an ideological censorship agenda, and I think the way to beat it is to just create alternative. In America, competition is the greatest panacea to wrongdoing, and I think that we have that opportunity now for anyone who doesn't like censorship. Build new platforms. There's Clout Hub, there's Parler, there is Rumble, the amazing new platforms. People are going to be leaving Twitter and Facebook. I think that'll be the big story of 2021.
Yes.
The exodus of Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, and the rise of new alternatives that stay true to the American free speech, free expression rights that we have and enjoyed for 240 plus years.
Well, a big name, Dan Bongino, God bless him, just announced that he is leaving Twitter and he's gone to Parler. We have our backup. We may be on Twitter, we may be on Facebook and YouTube, but we're everywhere else as well. Parler, Rumble, you name it. So I always doubted the capacity to create a free speech alternative to these platforms. But you know what? After the events of the last few days, I think it's going to happen, and it's going to be very robust. In the meantime, follow this man. Jay Solomon reports on Twitter, also on Real America's Voice, and most importantly, at justthenews.com. God bless you, John. Keep doing what you do. This is America First on the Salem Radio Network, broadcasting live from the ReliefFactor.com studios.